Okay, so today we're going over Chapter 5. Chapter 5, one of my favorite chapters. Because I think no matter what business you go into, what your major is, this is extremely important stuff. Obviously, I'm going to have to talk really fast because the last 20 minutes is going to be your quiz, but I hope to get you a majority of the relevant material in this chapter. It's one of my favorites. Chapter 5, elasticity of demand and supply. Elasticity, when we think about economics, has to do with the responsiveness or the movement of something. And in this case, we're going to focus actually on demand in this chapter, but we're also going to talk about supply. So actually I'm going to back up. We're going to talk about a little story first before you start taking notes. Does anybody, what does that big, huge drink at McDonald's cost? Cost $1. Do you guys remember a time when it was more than $1? You do? Okay, how much was it? Do you remember? It was $2.79, something like that. Okay? And they took it to $1 for a limited time only, over a decade ago. And it hasn't gone back. And it is because at the time they were testing what we call the elasticity of demand of that drink at a price of $1. Do we know that consumers are going to buy more when we reduce the price of a good? We already know that. This chapter isn't about that. We already learned that. This is about how much more consumers are going to buy if we take the price from $2.79 to $2. Are they going to buy a couple more? Are they going to buy a lot more? What do you think happened? Exponentially more, right? So there was a major elasticity of demand when it comes to those dollar drinks at McDonald's. That's what we're talking about. We're talking about what happens when we increase or decrease the price of a good in terms of not whether consumers are going to buy more or buy less. We already know that. It's how much more or how much less are they going to buy at those prices. Does that make sense? That's what we're talking about. Do you know it's possible that McDonald's is making a lot more money selling $1 drinks than they ever made selling $2.97 drinks?
No, we're not. Otherwise, it's switch it back.
Or, exactly, right? Or they'd switch it back if that wasn't the case. They're making so much more money on those dollar drinks that they actually reduced the price of their goods and are making more money. That's an important thing to know, right? Yeah, when you're thinking about how to price your good. Okay. So, the price elasticity of demand determines how responsive the market is to a change in price. How responsive are the consumers in your market when you change your price? This can be a change increase in price or a change decrease in price. Okay? The calculation, I wouldn't write this calculation down quite yet. I'm going to break it down so that it's a lot easier for you to do the calculation on the next slide. But in general, the way we calculate price elasticity is the percentage change in quantity demanded divided by the percentage change in price. It's a relationship between a change in price and the change in the quantity demanded that comes with that change in price. This is that same equation. Percentage delta is a change. That triangle delta is change. Percentage change in quantity divided by percentage change in price. Here's what we want to focus on. Here's going to be the equation you probably want to memorize. I'm going to simplify it a little bit more for you. I'm going to tell you how I memorized it when I had to memorize this equation. Because I think if you can break this down even more and simplify it, much easier to retain. You do need to memorize this formula for your exam. Okay? So, change in quantity. This right here represents percentage change in quantity, the numerator, okay? So it's the change in quantity. Did we go up in quantity? Did we go down in quantity? It doesn't matter, okay? It's just change in quantity, up or down, divided by quantity plus quantity prime divided by 2. So the sum of quantity and quantity prime divided by 2, or quantity 1 and quantity 2 divided by 2. What else could we call that denominator? The average quantity. Quantity 1 plus quantity 2 divided by 2, average quantity. That's how I would memorize it. That's the easiest way. Change in quantity divided by average quantity. That's your numerator. Your denominator, change in price divided by average price. By far the easiest way to memorize that. Okay? Pretty good with that? Okay. This just breaks down what some of the symbols in the equation mean. There's really no reason to write this down unless you don't understand the meaning of delta or the percentage sign. Okay? Any questions about that? Yeah? Good question. What's going to be on the exam? What's going to be on the exam is I'm going to give you the prices and the quantities, and I'm going to tell you to calculate the price elasticity of demand. So I would memorize this equation here. I'll give you the numbers. I'll expect you to be able to plug them into that equation and give me the price elasticity. And we'll go over here in a minute what that calculation, when we actually get that number, how to interpret that in terms of price elasticity. Okay? Any other questions? Okay. All right, so let's do an example. Okay? Here we have a demand curve for tacos. This is the example in your book. Okay? So if you need to go back and get a little bit more instruction, you can go back to your book. We are trying to decide, as the producers of tacos, whether we should decrease our price of tacos from $1.10 to 90 cents. We don't know what we should do. So we're going to gather a little data. We're going to plug it in to our price elasticity of demand equation, and we're going to come up with a number that's going to help us determine if we should reduce the price of our tacos. Do suppliers deal with this all the time? Yeah. Things go on sale a lot. Promotional deals. Taco Tuesday, right? There's a reason Taco Tuesday works, other than margaritas, right? And it's because we've designated a day for tacos. You know when the day is, so you'll show up at your favorite taco joint on that day, and you buy so many more tacos on that day than you do any other day of the week. This price elasticity of demand thing works for them. They sell so many more tacos at the lower price that they're actually probably making more money than they do selling tacos on Monday. Or why would they do it, right? Okay, so we're going to see what happens. This is our demand curve. This is our downward sloping demand curve here, right? Capital D. So if we change the price of tacos, remember prices already sit on that demand curve. All the information that we've gathered regarding prices is already contained on curve D, okay? So when we go down to 90 cents, we know lower price means a higher quantity demanded, okay? So the quantity demanded goes from 95 to 105. That makes sense, right? Should we reduce the price of our tacos to 90 cents? Price elasticity of demand will tell us if we should. It will tell us if consumers are responding in a big way to that reduction in price. Okay? Let's get our equation set. You should probably get your calculators out on your phones or whatever, and we'll walk through this. What goes on top of the equation? It's the first thing we need. Change in quantity. What's the change in quantity? 10. It's 10,000. We're going to keep it at 10 just to keep it simple. Okay, it's not going to change the math. Okay, so 10. What? We're still working on our numerator. Okay, what do we divide the 10 by? Average quantity. How do you find the average? You add them together. 200, divide by 2. 100, 100 is the average quantity. Any questions? So far, so good? Okay. demand for these tacos between the price of $1.10 and 90 cents. I'm not talking about between 90 cents and 80 cents, or 80 cents and 50 cents. That's a whole different calculation. I'm just talking about what is happening between point A and point B on my demand curve. How consumers on average are being responsive as we take prices from $1.10 to 90 cents. What this tells me is that consumers aren't being responsive to my change in price. Consumers are not increasing their quantities very much when I decrease the price from $1.10 to 90 cents. What should I do? Stay at your high price. Okay? Okay. So here are the categories of price elasticity of demand. These are the three different sort of indicators. Once we have calculated our 0.5, we need to figure out what it means. What does 0.5 mean? 0.5 falls under this inelastic. Inelastic, there's not that much movement. There's not that much response by consumers. So inelastic, absolute value between 0 and 1. That's our 0.5. The reason it throws absolute value up here is if you go back and you look at these numbers we used, the price was going down, which means that this was actually, right, a negative 20 cents. When you calculate price elasticity of demand, you can either put in your negatives and take the absolute value at the end, or the way I do it, I just leave the negatives out. Doesn't matter, right? We're talking about absolute value in terms of change. Okay? So that's why it says absolute value. So inelastic, the consumers didn't respond very much. Unit elastic is a coincidence. Okay? That means that we did our math and we came up with 1. That would very rarely happen, but if it does, what it's telling you is consumers are exactly as responsive in terms of quantity and price. That means you reduce your price by 20 cents or 20%, you get 20% more quantity demand. It would just mean that those percentages are exactly the same. Again, it's a coincidence. Okay? Elastic, any absolute value greater than 1. This can be a 2, this can be a 3, this can be a 4. These numbers can get big sometimes. Anything greater than a 1.0 is going to be what we call elastic. That means consumers were disproportionately responsive. They were very responsive to the change. If that's what we had found with these tacos, I would have told you to decrease the price to 90 cents. Does that make sense? Okay. This can be an increase in price or a decrease in price. There are goods that suppliers continue to increase the price of, but people still keep buying the same amount. What kind of stuff is that? Any thoughts? No? Gas? No. To a certain extent, gas, we need a minimum amount, right? I need a minimum amount to get to work and maintain my employment, right? Yep.
Paper towels, maybe? They like lower the price of that, but you still buy the same like quantity.
Okay, what if they increase the price of paper towels? Would you buy the same quantity?
I suppose so.
You would?
Well, I mean, if you're still buying the like
Yeah.
pack of it anyway.
I get it. I still keep buying them too. It
Yeah.
depends on what the price went to, but yeah, I see what you're saying. Yeah. There are things that are necessities. A certain amount of fuel in your vehicle is a necessity, right? To get to doctor's appointments, to get to your job, to get to school, whatever. And then there's a certain amount that's not, right? That you use for recreation or travel or things like that. So I would say it spans both of those. All right. So let's talk about how elasticity affects revenue. Let's define revenue first. Revenue is a business term that's very, very important. It's really fundamental, it's really basic, it's the most basic. the price that you sell your good at times the quantity of your good that you sold. It's really easy. How much money did you make that day? How much money is in your cash register at the end of the day? How much money did you collect from people that day, or that week, or that month? Okay? So total revenue is price times quantity. Price multiplied by quantity demanded at that price gives you total quantity. When we are experiencing elasticity, total revenue is on the increase. If we are experiencing unit elasticity, remember, this is a coincidence, okay? Revenue would stay the same. We'd be increasing price and decreasing quantity at the same percentage, or vice versa, but it would be level. Inelastic, total revenue decreases. So this is as we decrease price, as we go from $1.10 to 90 cents, if we're experiencing elasticity, our revenue would be increasing. We didn't experience elasticity. We got inelasticity, which means that our total revenue would actually decrease if we went from $1.10 to 90 cents. This is as we decrease price, what would happen to revenue, depending on our experience. Good? Okay. So I'm going to kind of set you up to show you a graph here. Okay, this graph is going to feel complicated. It's not. It's pretty simple, okay? But we're going to start thinking about prices and consumer response and how consumers feel about high prices, how consumers feel about low prices, etc. Okay, so this is just setting you up. This isn't going to mean much right now. We're going to be looking at a straight line demand curve. That's the type of demand curve we've been looking at all along. It just keeps it simple for you guys. It keeps the math simple. It keeps everything simple. And because it's straight, it's going to have a constant slope. So every straight line has a constant slope. How do we define slope? How did you define it in math class? Rise over run, right? And so if we're looking at a downward sloping demand curve, the rise over run would remain the same. Because of that constant slope, something remains constant in terms of a given decrease in price. Okay, a decrease in price is going to be your rise, and your run is going to be quantity. So the same decrease in price is going to create the same increase in quantity as we go down the demand curve. You're going to see that. It's not complicated, okay? Let's just look at it real quick. So downward sloping demand curve, all this is saying is that for every $10 decrease in price, we're going to have a $100 increase, or I'm sorry, a 100 unit increase in quantity demanded. So for every $10. So whether we're going from 100 to or 90, or 60 and 50, or 30 and 20, it's still going to create the same amount of change. Okay? And that's just going to keep this analysis simple. So here we're talking about a different good. Let's talk about, let's imagine this is for jeans. Okay? So this is the demand curve for some jeans. At $90 per pair, we would sell 100 units per period, so whether that's a week or a month, we don't know. But if we decrease the price to 80, we would sell an additional 100 units. Okay? So on and so forth as we go down. Now let's think about this. Let's think about how you and I feel about discounts on high prices, or how you would feel about a discount down here at lower prices. This has to do with human behavior. When prices are high and you get a discount, you feel a lot better about that discount than if something's already cheap and you get a discount. Okay? And if you think about that on sort of an exaggerated level, if you go to buy a new car and they say, we're going to give you 10% off of your new car, you're like, oh, okay, well that's $2 or $3 grand. that might influence my decision making. I might buy a car. If I tell you that I'm going to give you a 10% discount on your Gatorade at Circle K, be like, yeah, I'm still going to buy about the same amount of Gatorade at Circle K, right? Both 10%, but one started expensive, one started cheap. It's different. Yep.
Isn't just like a marketing strategy to trick you, like you increase everything by 10% and then say, oh, 10% off, so it's be the same price anyways. But then you're like, oh, I got a discount, so you feel good, so you buy it.
Yeah, and that's a marketing scheme, right? Yeah, for sure. Happens all the time, right? I go into Kohl's all the time and buy something, and they're like, you saved $149. I'm like, no, right? No. Everything there is on sale all the time, right? It's ridiculous. Okay, so let's think about the losses and the gains that we're experiencing in revenue if we decrease the price from $90 down to $80. How much money are we going to bring in if we sell 100 pairs of jeans at $90 per pair? $9,000, right? Okay, so get rid of this. So under that first scenario, right, we'll bring in revenue of $9,000. Let's think about what happens if instead we reduce the price to $80, but we sell 200 units. That's 16, right? How much did you increase revenue by decreasing price? $7,000 in additional money you brought in the door by decreasing the price. This is what McDonald's figured out, right? Okay, so the difference is $7,000 in additional revenue. That's pretty good. We should definitely consider reducing the price from 90 to 80 because it's going to increase revenue, right? Let's look at these two. Sorry about this, just ignore all this down here for a minute. Let's stay focused on areas A and B, which I'm going to shade in right now. Area A and area B represent the gain and the loss in revenue from decreasing the price. So just bear with me a minute, okay? In order to get this additional 100 units of sales, we had to decrease the price of these first 100 units by $10 per unit. Let's think about that. You could have sold these first 100 units for $90 per unit, but instead you reduced the price to $80 in order to gain these 100 units. So area A, and you can use geometry and calculate the area, okay, represents how much loss in revenue we experienced by reducing the price. And area B represents the increase in revenue. It's that whole big strip there. We got to sell an additional 100 units times $80 per unit. So let's do the math that way. I think what you're going to find is it turns out exactly the same. Okay? So how much revenue did we lose? That's area A. We had to reduce our first 100 units by $10 per unit. How much did we lose? Think I heard it? 1,000, right? 1,000. The difference between 80 and 80 and 90 is 10. 10 times 100, right? Base times height. Isn't that how you would calculate area A? Yeah, so 100 times 10 would give you 1,000. That's the revenue we lost. The revenue we gained is this whole pink strip here, area B. Our base is 100. What's our height? 80. 80 times 100 is 8,000. A $1,000 loss produced an $8,000 gain. When you net those two together, you still have a $7,000 gain. Right? That's what we found. Good? You should definitely do this. Are you experiencing elasticity or inelasticity if when you decrease let's try the same reduction of $10 and see that we have an actually totally opposite outcome. Okay? Same demand curve, same $10, except for produces a different outcome because of where we are in our pricing scheme on our demand curve. Okay? So, here, in order to sell 100 more units going from 800 to 900, we would have to reduce our price from $20 to $10. When we reduce our price from $20 to $10, we lose the additional $10 that we could have charged on 800 units in order to gain $10 on 100 units. In this case, it's very obvious to see that the loss far outweighs the gain. What can we say about consumer behavior on that end of the demand curve? They're being inelastic, right? Same demand curve, same jeans. Wouldn't you agree that if a pair of jeans started out at $90, by the time it got to 20 or 10, everybody that wanted those jeans would actually already own them? Where are they now? Now that they're $20 and $10, where have those jeans ended up? Yeah, they're at Ross, right? TJ Maxx, they might even be in a thrift store, right? But consumers don't respond as much at lower prices as they do at higher prices, even though it's the same $10. Okay, so just an interesting thing to recognize about pricing and about demand. That top part of the demand curve would be considered elastic. You could continue to reduce your prices all the way down to $50 and still continue to rev up your revenue, okay? As soon as you hit your unit elastic point, this point of transition here, as you then continue to additionally reduce prices, what you would see is consumers win these. Okay? Don't overthink this, okay? You just need to understand what happens to pricing, the psychology of high prices versus low prices, and things like that, okay? If we were going to calculate revenue like we did here, right, this 9,000, this 16,000, where we took price times quantity, if we did that all the way down the demand curve, and we graphed the revenue, it would look something like this. Again, don't overthink this. What this is saying is that as we go from 0 units to 500 units, so as we reduce the price starting at $100 down to $50, as we do that, our revenue continues to rise. Okay? As we reduce price, it plateaus out here. And then as we reduce the price below $50 a pair, we would see our revenue begin to nosedive. You want to sell somewhere where you get a lot of revenue, right? That's a goal. It's a little more complicated than that, okay? But definitely starting out with high revenues is a good thing, because what do you have to subtract from the revenue before you can figure out what your profit is? Your expenses. That's a totally different layer here. We're not there yet, right? But you know that high revenue is going to increase the likelihood of high profits, right? Okay. All right. So constant elasticity demand curves. So we're going to talk about 3 special types of demand curves, and we're going to show them to you here in a minute. The 3 types are perfectly elastic. These are going to look kind of strange, okay? This is going to be a horizontal demand curve. Perfectly inelastic is going to be a vertical demand curve, perfectly vertical, okay? And unit elastic demand curve, we are not going to spend a second on this because it would be a coincidence. It's very unrealistic, and it can't really give you a good example of a good that would fall under that type of demand curve, okay? Just like unit elasticity, it's just a coincidence. But these two, there's some interesting things to talk about. A perfectly elastic demand curve would say that consumers demand all that is offered at a given price, but if you try and increase the price at all, demand will go to 0. We'll think about what goods might fall under that scenario. Perfectly inelastic is a vertical demand curve, means that price has no effect on quantity demanded, okay? So let's look at those demand curves real quick. So these are going to be the three demand curve. That first one, I don't know why the heading didn't come up on that. That should say perfectly elastic. Okay? I'll see if I can add that back in. So what this says is that people, consumers, will buy all that's available at some given price. But if you try and increase the price by 1 penny, as a consumer, I will buy 0. What good do you buy at a single price? And if someone tries to charge you more than that, you know it's not the given price, so you're not going to buy it.
Arizona tea, it's like on the label, 99 cents.
I love that. Okay, Arizona tea. It says 99 cents on it. If someone tries to charge you $1, you're like, nope. My demand has gone to 0 because the price is 99 cents, right? Perfect. Is there any reason for anybody to sell Arizona iced tea for less than 99 cents? That's the going price, okay? They probably sell an awful lot of it at 99 cents. What else? What else has a set going price that you can either look online and find at any given point in time, or remains the same no matter who the supplier is? $1 for a pop, right? What? Oh, wow. No, it wouldn't. No, it wouldn't. How about an ounce of gold? Can you look online and see what the going price for an ounce of gold is at any given point in time? Would you pay a penny more? You don't have to. That's the going price for gold. Gold has a price. That's the price. Don't pay more. There's no reason for anybody to sell it for less. It's just the price. A share of stock. You know this isn't a finance class, but stock is fractional ownership in a company, right? It's exchanged on the New York Stock Exchange and stock exchanges all over the world. It has a going price. There's a price for a share of stock at this very moment. And that's what you have to pay for it. There's no reason to pay a penny more because that's the price, right? That's what we would see in those types of cases. We would see a fairly elastic demand curve, which means that if you try and charge me a penny more, consumer response is going to be, I'll buy nothing. Perfect responsiveness. Perfect responsiveness to price. Does that make sense? Kind of? Okay, those are the best examples I have. Perfectly inelastic. We talked a little bit about this, right? Gasoline came up. It's a little inelastic, right? At least portions of it are. Basically talking about goods that no matter what happens to price, quantity stays the same. Price can go up, quantity demanded still stays the same. How about life-saving medication? Doesn't matter what it costs. You're going to buy it, right? You don't need more than you need. So even if the price goes down, it's not like you're going to buy more because you need a pill a day, right? But if the price goes up, you're still going to buy your pill a day. You'll probably stop buying something else long before you stop buying your life-saving medication. Does that make sense? Yeah. Highly addictive substances. If you were going to draw a demand curve for crack, this is what it would look like, right? Yeah, nicotine, anything like that, that's going to have a fairly inelastic demand curve, right? The price of cigarettes, I don't even know what they cost now. I can't even stand to think about it, right? As the price goes up, there are people who just don't change their demand. Some people do, but a lot of people don't, right? This is what unit elastic demand curve would look like. Again, it would be a coincidence that a good would have that sort of a demand curve, but it's not very important. These other two are much more likely, much more practical, much more relevant, much more important. Okay? All right. Determinants of the price elasticity of demand. What are those things that determine whether a good is etc. Probably the most important attribute we would need to think about is whether that good had a lot of substitutes. When we talk about your life-saving medication, there just aren't many substitutes. So that reduces the elasticity of that good. Consumers can't be responsive to a change in price if it keeps them alive, right? If there are a lot of substitutes, there's much more elasticity. It's why I think this example in your book is a little off, the one we did about tacos. Tacos do have substitutes. The price of tacos goes down, you will stop buying other food items that are more expensive and you'll start buying more tacos, and vice versa. The price of tacos goes up, you will likely buy less tacos and more of other things. These must have been special tacos. And there are special tacos in the world, I guarantee. But most tacos in general aren't going to be inelastic. They're going to see more elasticity, okay? The share of the consumer's budget spent on the good, the greater the income effect. Income effect, we're talking about buying power. Remember, we talked about that a couple chapters ago. The greater the income effect, the greater it affects your buying power, the greater the elasticity. It's like your rent. Your rent is a huge portion of your budget. If they increase your rent, they do increase your rent, right? As they increase your rent, you become more willing to move out of your existing apartment and go find another substitute someplace cheaper, or find a substitute arrangement, get another roommate, whatever, right? Because that's a large portion of your income. The length of adjustment period. The length of adjustment period. If the price of gas tripled, there is nothing I can do about it right now. I bought a new vehicle last year. I'm not getting rid of it. It runs on gasoline. That's that, right? But give me 7 or 8 years when I buy my next vehicle, and I might make a different decision about my use of gasoline, right? I might buy a different kind of vehicle. It doesn't require so much gas. It doesn't require gas at all. The more time you give me, the more substitutes I can come up with to be able to then be reactionary, be responsive to a change in price. Does that make sense to everybody? Yep. You don't. But I'm saying if the price changed today, I'm not going to do anything about it a week from now or probably a year from now. But you give me 6 or 7 years, I'm going to react to that change in price. Does that kind of make sense? Other substitutes become available and things happen all the time. Yeah. That's a great question. Any questions about any of this? Okay. Short versus long run, we just talked about this. This was that gasoline thing I just talked about. Okay? Elasticity is greater in the long run because consumers have had more time to react to a price change. You give consumers more time to find more substitutes, make different decisions, they can be more responsive to the change in price. Usually in the upward direction, but sometimes when prices go down, you can't take advantage of that right away, but if you give us some time, we'll figure out how to substitute that in. But for the most part, we're talking about prices getting higher. Okay? Okay, I'm going to go through this part really quick. This is price elasticity of supply. This is the other side of this discussion. And it's how responsive producers are to changes in price. Consumers, producers. We know that as price goes up, suppliers are willing to produce more. That's not this discussion, right? This discussion is how much more. If prices go down, consumers are not going to produce as much. The question is, how much less will they produce? So it's about suppliers' responsiveness to price. We know they're responsive. How responsive are they? This isn't nearly as important as price elasticity of demand. If I was going to focus my attention for exams, I would focus on price elasticity of demand by far. Okay? This isn't that important to that many people. there are very few people tracking price elasticity of supply. There are very few people sitting out there trying to figure out how suppliers would respond to changes in price. I can tell you some of the biggest entities tracking this are going to be the military. If we order 100 more bombers, what price do we need to pay in order to get those produced in the next year? How responsive will our suppliers be to that change in price? How quickly will they produce for us if we increase the price? Does that make sense? The government, when they're thinking about things like food supply, when they're thinking about things like vaccines, how can we incent suppliers to produce more for us? Well, we can give more money. How much more? Does that make sense? So it's folks that are thinking big picture supply on some necessities, some big ticket items. Measures how responsive producers are to a change in price. It is exactly the same calculation. It's exactly the same calculation as price elasticity of demand. Okay? You are taking the changes and the averages, you're setting them up in exactly the same way. Okay. You don't need to write this down again because you're already going to memorize it for price elasticity of demand. Change in quantity over average quantity in your numerator, change in price over average price in your denominator, elasticity of supply, it's exactly the same. What we find, though, is we don't talk about absolute values because price and quantity change in the same direction, which means you're going to have two positives or you're going to have two negatives. Either way, you're going to end up with positives, so we don't need to worry about absolute values on this one. Okay? All right, we're not going to do this calculation, okay? But you can see, you can see that price and quantity move in the same direction, creating this scenario. All right. Constant elasticity supply curves. We're going to talk about special supply curves, okay? Again, these aren't incredibly important. There's just some interesting things to think about, some interesting details in here. Just like with demand curves, we have perfectly elastic supply curves, perfectly inelastic supply curves, and unit elastic supply curves. Again, this is a coincidence. Couldn't really give you any example of what goods might fall under that, but we'll talk about the other two a little bit, okay? I'm going to show you some examples of what those curves look like, and we'll talk about a couple examples so you can kind of wrap your head around it. Okay, so again, perfectly elastic, perfectly inelastic, unit elastic. We're not even going to talk about this. This doesn't make much sense. But let's think about goods from a supply side. Basically, suppliers supply as much as they desire at some given price. But if you decrease that price by a penny, their supply will go to zero. Any thought about what these goods might be? It's sort of gonna mimic that of perfectly elastic demand. There are some goods that are just sold at a certain price. Don't try and offer the supplier a penny less. Especially suppliers that are making very small amounts of profit to begin with. If you offer them less than that, their supply is going to go to zero. They're just not going to be able to afford to supply you those goods. Okay? That's just a general statement about goods that might fall here. Perfectly inelastic. There are some really realistic examples of goods in which, as the price goes up and down, the supply does not change. The quantity, the number supplied doesn't change. What kind of goods, no matter how the price changes, the quantity stays exactly the same. Quantity supplied. What's that? Yeah. Yeah, this is going to be one of those gray areas. How about things in limited quantity? How about if you count up the number of 1965 red convertible Corvettes? As the price change, does the quantity supplied change? It stays exactly the same, doesn't it? There are a lot of goods out there that aren't in a finite supply. And the price can go up and down, but supply would stay exactly the same. Okay? Again, these aren't incredibly important. They are probably, it's the concepts, right? It's the concepts behind these curves that are important. Again, one of the biggest determinants of supply is going to be this length of time thing. It takes time to produce stuff. It takes time to supply more goods. You give suppliers more time, they can supply more goods. Especially if they're producing a good that actually takes time to produce. For example, if the price of oranges goes up, do orange suppliers want to give you more oranges? Yeah, they only have so many of them. If they want to give you more oranges than they're currently producing, what do they have to do? Plant orange trees to get more oranges, right? It's going to take a lot of time to get more oranges if you got to plant an orange tree and wait for more oranges, right? But you give them more time, they can produce more for you. They can find the resources and give you what you want. There's a couple other elasticity measures that we're going to talk about real quick. We got about 3 minutes before we start your exam, okay? Just a couple quick things. We're not going to do any calculations. We're just going to talk about these, okay? Income elasticity of demand is another calculation that we do where we think about what happens to your demand for certain goods as your income changes. There are things that people that make a lot of money buy more of, and there are people who don't make much money who buy more of other things. We talked about normal versus inferior goods, right? This is a calculation that we could do to help figure out if a good is normal or inferior if we didn't know, okay? So there's a reason that really expensive wine shops are located in areas where people have lots of disposable income, right? Is because of the income elasticity of demand for wine and champagne. The more money you make, you buy a disproportionately higher number of bottles of wine and champagne, right? We know that's a normal good, but if you ever had any question about whether you were selling an inferior good or a normal good, this would help you determine that, or how much income influences the things that you're selling and the quantity that people are buying at those prices. How many more bottles of wine would people buy if they make $120,000 instead of $100,000, right? That's interesting stuff to know if that's what you're selling. Cross-price elasticity of demand is a calculation that helps us take a couple of goods and figure out if we change the price of one good, what happens to the quantity demanded of another. So this is a discussion about substitutes and complements. We already talked about that.